What happens when you combine The Exorcist, Night of the Living Dead, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and add a dash of Three Stooges? You get Evil Dead. In his 1982 review, which helped the movie find distribution, Stephen King called it a black rainbow of horror. And just like a rainbow, bringing all colors together in a beautiful display, The Evil Dead distills everything Sam Raimi learned about horror into one insane movie. When Sam Raimi was in high school, he and his friends would make short Super 8 films. His buddy Bruce Campbell was usually the one in front of the cameras because, according to Sam, he was the best looking of the bunch. They usually aimed for comedy and took inspiration from or straight up stole from their favorite Three Stooges gags. But once they hit college age, it was time to take a swing at the big leagues and make their feature film debut. Sam brought in a new friend he made at Michigan State University to be their producer, Robert Tappert, and the three of them got to work. Starting with horror was actually more of a business decision than a creative one. Visiting drive-ins in the late 70s, Tappert saw that horror movies were playing on constant rotation. If they wanted a shot at getting their movie played, it seemed like horror was the perfect entry point. But Raimi was no horror expert, so he and Bruce joined Robert at the drive-ins and learned. Their takeaway? A lot of horror movies under-delivered. So, as Raimi put it in an interview with Empire magazine in 2009, we were trying to make what we had seen in horror films, but trying to cut out the boring parts. Over the years, Raimi has been clear that his ultimate goal is to entertain. He considers boring the audience to be a crime.
The worst crime I think that filmmakers can make is to make a boring picture. If it's boring, then it's all over. The audience, you've failed in entertaining them. You've committed a crime.
This origin story helps make sense of why the Evil Dead series goes so over the top. With his first feature, Raimi was intent on never boring the audience, and where he felt other horror movies under-delivered, he would do his best to over-deliver. The result? This movie assaults you with evil. The Deadites don't just look a little dead. They look like Reagan at her worst in The Exorcist, and then some. Their voices are loud and off-putting, and they are aggressively violent. Cheryl stabs Linda's ankle with a pencil and really digs it in there so even you feel it. Shelley chews off her own hand, and while she's screaming, so is Cheryl, while also struggling against the trap door which has her locked in the basement. Deadites scream, chains rattle, ash gets flung around the room, knocking down shelves. It's pure chaos. Until Scotty dismembers, beheads, and generally mutilates Shelley, who happens to be his girlfriend. And while he chops away, her demonic screaming continues, only calming once her various parts are left wriggling on the floor. YouTube is a family-friendly place, so I gotta blur a lot of this stuff, but you should at least listen to the audio for a second. As gross a sound as you'd expect. In another interview, Sam Raimi explained,
There are two schools of thought, I think, for horror filmmakers. One is that the audience can always create something more horrible than you can show them. And the other school of thought is show them everything.
He sometimes dabbles in the first school of thought, but more often than not in the Evil Dead series aims for the latter. Now, any cabin in the woods horror will have you asking, why don't they just get back in the car and drive to the nearest town? Well, evil forces have destroyed the bridge. Also, the woods themselves are possessed, so the trees will attack you if you try to leave. Hell, even the camera is possessed. Raimi wanted to portray an evil force rushing through the woods, so they bolted a camera to a plank, two people held either end, and they ran. He called the effect shaky cam, and it's become a staple of the series ever since. But even when the camera isn't a stand-in for a Kandarian demon, it still feels alive. It's often handheld and moving frenetically to keep pace with the chaos on screen. In that famous review, Stephen King praised the movie for its weirdly convincing documentary look, something he favorably compared to Night of the Living Dead. In part, he attributed this to how grainy the movie looks, a result of blowing up the film from 16mm to 35mm for theatrical exhibition. This was done to save money as it was less expensive to shoot on 16mm. That raw look, combined with inventive practical makeup and effects, makes the experience physical. When it comes to character development and themes, The Evil Dead is unambitious. For example, Evil Dead Rise is praised for putting a family in the crosshairs, so it's not just friends getting possessed, but brothers, sisters, and mothers. Those familial bonds make the stakes that much higher. But The Evil Dead got there first. Cheryl is Ash's sister. The only problem is that the movie never establishes this. It only comes out in a line of dialogue 56 minutes into the movie, and it's something you might skip over as the insane rantings of a demon.
I'm all right now! It's your sister, Cheryl!
But The Evil Dead doesn't need character development or thematic depth to accomplish its ambition, to make you feel like you've come face to face with some nasty demons, which Evil Dead 2 reveals are called Deadites. People will often say that Evil Dead 2 is when the series became funny, but even this first movie flirts with the idea, because one form of comedy is absurdity, and as this movie pushes the envelope, and Raimi tries to show us everything, sometimes it crosses into the absurd. Where exactly you draw that line might differ from person to person, but I definitely laugh at Linda versus Ash and his shovel. She leaps out of her makeshift grave, Ash swings his shovel, and he ends up with a headless woman wriggling on top of him. Blood gushes out of the new hole where a head used to be, covering Ash's face in bodily fluids, something that's become another staple of the series. Meanwhile, Linda's bodiless head somehow laughs and moans on the ground nearby. It's a similar pattern that Sam Raimi continues into Evil Dead 2 and some of his other movies. A scene will begin with straight-up horror and escalate to the point where it crosses into absurd comedy, which gives way to incorporate other forms of comedy, like Three Stooges-style slapstick or over-the-top one-liners, like
Groovy.
Exciting movies are often called roller coaster rides, and the best part of a roller coaster is when you slowly make your way to the top, then suddenly plunge back down to the bottom on a steep decline. In a horror movie, the incline might be the building of tension in a dark room, and the plunge is a jump scare before returning to a more neutral tone. But Evil Dead 2 doesn't stop with the plunge. It keeps going until it finds the absurdity that can turn horror into comedy. Ash heads into the basement to look for the Necronomicon's missing pages. He slowly makes his way through the darkness, when suddenly, he's attacked by the undead Henrietta. Typical horror would resolve with a quick death or escape, effectively hitting the brakes and returning to a more neutral pace. Evil Dead 2 instead floors it and escalates. Henrietta becomes a grotesque and bloated thing floating above them, before turning into a stop-motion creature with an elongated neck, which for some reason also makes monkey noises while Ash swings his chainsaw. Sometimes, rather than escalating to the point of absurdity, Raimi just starts there. Early in the movie, Ash watches Linda's headless body perform a dance as she reattaches her head. It's simultaneously ridiculous and unsettling. This is also the movie where Ash starts to become the character he's known as today, the overconfident one who spouts one-liners with a chainsaw in place of one hand and a boomstick in the other. At times, he's an impressive action hero who'd better fit in an over-the-top action movie.
I'll swallow your soul! I'll swallow your soul!
Swallow this.
And at other times, he's a fool who'd better fit in a Three Stooges skit. The character is hilarious, and especially so in the context of a horror movie, because when you think of evil forces and demonic possessions, you imagine threats which can't be stopped by any normal means. They require priests, rituals, or ancient artifacts. And Evil Dead certainly incorporates some of these things. But between incantations and special daggers, you get good old-fashioned ass-kicking, courtesy of Ash Williams. Something that should be wildly out of place, but isn't, thanks to Raimi's unique brand of insanity. Many say that Evil Dead 2 essentially functions as a remake. Technically, that's not entirely true. It starts with a quick retelling of the events of the first movie, but with some key differences. In this version, Ash came to the cabin with only his girlfriend Linda, no Cheryl, Scotty, or Shelley. But like the original, Ash was forced to kill Linda, and ultimately he himself was possessed by the Kandarian demon, and that's where the new story begins. So it does function as a sequel to a rough retelling of the first movie. But tonally, Evil Dead 2 does feel like Sam Raimi and company taking another swing at roughly the same ideas, now with more resources and confidence. They experiment with more practical effects. They go further in mixing horror and comedy. The camera is even more alive, now actually smashing through walls and windows. The trees, too, are more alive. And Bruce Campbell gets more to do. Lots of physical comedy, the highlight for me being Ash versus his possessed hand. He gets to play evil Ash, and he gets so many great lines.
Bastards! You dirty bastard! Give me back my hand!
Then let's head down into that cellar and carve ourselves a witch.
We'll double barrel her! Blow your butts! The kingdom come! See if we don't. You're going down. Chainsaw.
Like the first Evil Dead, this one is all about entertaining and just being as fun as possible. Later movies, the 2013 Evil Dead and 2023's Evil Dead Rise, try to infuse some themes into the story, commenting on addiction in one and motherhood in the other. In part, I think that's just what the filmmakers felt inspired to do, and in part, I think it's because the Evil Dead formula, in and of itself, is no longer novel 30 to 40 years later, so there's some pressure to use that formula toward other ends. There's also pressure to create more fleshed out characters, because any attempt at another fun character like Ash would draw unfavorable comparison to Ash. But it'd be reductive to say Evil Dead 2 is just a fun movie. There are a lot of fun movies, but this one is clearly something special. It's become a staple of pop culture, launched a franchise, and created an icon. All the things I mentioned. The inventive practical effects, the creative use of the camera, the character of Ash are all part of what makes it special. And when it comes to being fun, it's important to know what it's having fun with. Demonic possession, evil forces, and all things that should terrify us. But Evil Dead 2 instead gives us the opportunity to laugh at them, which is a far cry from what the original creator of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis intended. The book which unleashed the Deadites in Evil Dead was actually borrowed from the stories of H.P. Lovecraft. It was first mentioned in his 1924 short story, The Hound. Two grave robbers discover an amulet that was mentioned in the Necronomicon. After taking it, they are haunted by a distant howling. One of them is killed by a mysterious creature summoned by the amulet, while the narrator succumbs to madness and ultimately decides to take his own life. Lovecraft's stories attempt to stir up feelings of existential dread, forcing readers to face the unimaginable and inconceivable. His stories and others in the horror genre can sometimes leave you contemplating a malevolent or indifferent universe. You might find yourself waking from nightmares and fearing the dark. The Necronomicon and the demonic possessions that come with it should stir up those same feelings. But when those Deadites dare tread on the world of the living, Ash is the one they greet on the other side. At best, they get to be his scene partner in a bizarre physical comedy sketch, but at worst, they have to pick their poison, chainsaw or boomstick. So the next time you scare yourself a little too much with a genuinely terrifying movie like Hereditary or The Exorcist, or the next time things aren't going well and the world feels like a dark and malevolent place, think of Ash Williams laughing in its face. Add Evil Dead 2 to your movie medicine cabinet. Need motivation to work out? You grab Rocky off the shelf. Feeling contemplative? Want to think about humanity's place in the universe? Maybe you need a dose of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Or maybe things aren't going well. Lately, you've had the worst luck, like you're cursed and the world is against you. Okay, for that, maybe a little Evil Dead 2 is what you need. Then tell yourself, groovy, and get back to work. 5 years after Evil Dead 2, Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell returned with Army of Darkness, a movie which finds Ash becoming the hero foretold in the Necronomicon. This movie still incorporates some of the first two movies' gore and horror imagery, but I can't genuinely say there are any parts of the movie that scare me. Instead, Army of Darkness acts mainly as a celebration of Ash, transported by the Necronomicon to the medieval days and no longer confined to a cabin in the woods. Ash has so many more characters to play off of, so we get to see a lot more of his personality, and it's just as funny as the flashes shown in Evil Dead 2. The cheesy but effective action hero antics.
You know your shoelace is untied. All right. Who wants some? Who's next? Huh? How about it? Who wants some? Huh? Who wants to have a little?
The total unwillingness to actually be a hero.
Only you, the promised one, can quest for it.
I don't want your book. I don't want your bullshit. Just send me back to my own time. Pronto, today.
The bravado.
Give me some sugar, baby.
There are so many other lines I could pull, but it would essentially turn this video into a montage of funny Army of Darkness clips. And there are so many of them because this movie gives Ash so much to do. So rather than go through them all, I'll go through my favorite gag from the movie, which I think also encapsulates much of what makes the character so great. These are also the parts of the movie which always have me laughing the hardest. To get home, Ash has to retrieve the Necronomicon, but before grabbing it, he is told that he has to recite specific words, and he's totally uncooperative.
Klaatu Verata Nikto.
Again!
I got it! I know your damn words, all right?
And of course, when the time comes, he forgets the words and instead tries to fake his way through, as though you can trick a mysterious demonic force.
Klaatu Verata.
And that goes about as well as you'd expect.
Hey, wait a minute. Everything's cool. I said the word. I did.
When Ash returns to town, he's pretty fed up.
Yeah, great. Get the fuck out of my face.
And finally, when it's obvious he didn't recite the words properly, Ash reacts only the way he could.
When you removed the Necronomicon from the cradle, did you speak the words?
Yeah, basically.
Did you speak the exact words?
Look, maybe I didn't say every single little tiny syllable, no, but basically I said them, yeah.
There's something so funny about pitting this character against evil and seeing his completely unearned confidence paying off. He's unwilling to put in any more than the barest minimum of effort. He's impatient and unwilling to take any responsibility. Yet he will win in the end. Though depending on the ending you pick, that win comes with a big caveat. The original finds him trying to get back home, but accidentally going too far into the future and waking up in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. He also gets plenty more physical comedy too. There's Ash versus an army of small Ashes. There's Ash with a second evil head, who grows into an entirely separate Ash. And with about triple the budget of Evil Dead 2, they get to have a little more fun with the FX, some of which let Ash evolve his comedy from Three Stooges to Looney Tunes. And they get to create a Jason and the Argonauts-inspired army of Deadites for the movie's climax. Led, by the way, by Ash's double, who he killed but was subsequently resurrected by his botched incantation. Overall, the fun of this movie is in celebrating Ash and Evil Dead by taking the character and the Deadite effects further than either previous movie. Evil Dead 2 will probably always be my favorite because that's the one that's best at both scaring me and making me laugh. Army of Darkness does plenty of the latter, but without the scares, it doesn't feel quite as much like I'm laughing in the face of terror. Instead, I'm only laughing. To me, it works best when viewed right after too, like getting off the roller coaster and spending the rest of the day gorging yourself on fried food, ice cream, and other amusement park treats. Army of Darkness also holds an important place in the franchise, because where 2 started painting the picture of Ash Williams, the final entry of the trilogy completed it. Army of Darkness is the one which truly crowns Ash as a horror icon.
Hail to the king, baby.
Since Army of Darkness, if you found your medicine cabinet looking a little scarce, we now thankfully have Ash vs. Evil Dead. The series was sadly cut short, but 30 episodes translates to an additional 15 hours of Ash Williams kicking Deadite ass, which is 15 more than I ever expected to get after they went the reimagining route in 2013. And though the franchise has changed flavors without Ash, I still enjoyed Rise as something new using some familiar elements. Make sure to check out my video on that movie if you haven't already. And although Bruce has retired from playing the role in live action, he's kept hope alive for a possible return to voice the character in animation. But until then, the original trilogy and subsequent TV series are enough to scare you, then give you a chance to grab a chainsaw, boomstick, and laugh horror right in its stupid, deadite face.
Let's go.
I think we can wrap it up there. Make sure to let me know what the Evil Dead series has meant to you in the comments. And as always, let me know if there are other movies or shows you'd want me to cover. And while you're at it, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more. With that, thank you for watching, and see you on the next One Take.